success destroys more people than failure ever could. Look around at the trail of broken celebrities, fallen business titans, and imploded political careers. The higher they climb, the harder they fall. But why? Most people think it's about external temptations: money, power, fame. But Carl Jung, one of history's most profound psychologists, discovered something far more disturbing. The true danger isn't what success brings into your life. It's what success unearths from within you. Part 1. The Jungian Shadow Explained. Before we can understand why success becomes a psychological minefield, we need to grasp Jung's concept of the shadow. In Jung's model of the psyche, your conscious mind, the you that you identify with, is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath lies the unconscious, and within that unconscious dwells the shadow. The shadow contains everything you've rejected, denied, or disowned about yourself. The traits, desires, and impulses that didn't fit your self-image or weren't acceptable to your family, culture, or society. The anger you were told to suppress. The selfishness you were taught was wrong. The sexuality you were made to feel ashamed of. The weakness you couldn't afford to show. You didn't eliminate these aspects of yourself. You simply pushed them into the darkness. But here's Jung's crucial insight. What you refuse to make conscious doesn't disappear. It remains active in your unconscious, gathering strength and autonomy. Jung wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. The more you deny your shadow, the more powerful and dangerous it becomes. Think of it like air in a sealed room. The more you try to compress it into a smaller space, the more pressure builds. Eventually, that pressure will find a way out, often explosively and destructively. The shadow isn't inherently evil. It simply contains the rejected parts of your full humanity. Some of these parts may indeed be primitive or destructive, your capacity for cruelty, exploitation, or domination. But others might be your deepest creativity, passion, or authenticity that society deemed inappropriate or threatening. What makes the shadow dangerous isn't its content, but its autonomy. When denied conscious integration, these disowned aspects of yourself begin operating independently, sabotaging your conscious intentions and erupting in ways you can't control. And here's where success enters the picture. Nothing activates the shadow more powerfully than success. The higher you climb, the stronger the pressure from below. Part 2. Success as shadow accelerant. Why does success specifically trigger the shadow? There are several critical mechanisms at work. First, success amplifies your persona. The social mask Jung identified as the face we present to the world. As you achieve recognition, your public identity becomes increasingly polished and narrowly defined. The successful doctor must always appear competent. The spiritual leader must always seem virtuous. The CEO must always project strength. But the more rigid and idealized your persona becomes, the more energy must be spent maintaining it, and the more aspects of your full humanity must be denied and banished to the shadow. Second, success removes external restraints. When you're unknown and unaccomplished, social constraints keep your shadow in check. You control impulses partly because you can't get away with indulging them. But with success comes power, and power means fewer consequences. People won't challenge you. They'll excuse your behavior. They'll enable your worst tendencies. Without these external guardrails, The only thing holding your shadow in check is your internal integration, the very thing most successful people have neglected in their climb to the top. Third, success creates identity attachment. The more you achieve, the more your sense of self becomes fused with your accomplishments and status. This creates an existential fragility. Any threat to your success becomes a threat to your very being, activating primal survival instincts and primitive defenses housed in the shadow. Fourth, success breeds isolation. As you rise, fewer people tell you the truth. You become surrounded by sycophants and separated from authentic feedback. This social isolation mirrors and reinforces your psychological isolation from disowned parts of yourself. And finally, success consumes attention. The demands of maintaining and expanding achievement leave little energy for introspection or inner work. The shadow thrives in this neglect. All these factors create the perfect conditions for what Jung called enantiodromia, the tendency for anything pushed to an extreme to transform into its opposite. The harder you push toward the light of success while denying your shadow, the more powerful the counter-movement from below. This is why the most dramatic falls from grace often seem like complete personality reversals. The anti-corruption politician caught in bribery schemes, the family values preacher exposed in sexual scandals, the wellness guru whose private life is plagued by addiction. These aren't simple hypocrisies, they're shadow eruptions, the return of the repressed in its most destructive form. Part 3. Shadow manifestations in successful people. The shadow doesn't emerge in a single form. It adapts its expression to the specific nature of your success and your particular pattern of psychological repression. Let's examine some common manifestations in successful people. The first pattern is self-sabotage. This is where your unconscious undercuts your conscious goals. The executive who makes an inexplicably poor decision right after a major achievement. The athlete who develops mysterious injuries before important competitions. The artist who misses critical deadlines when their career is taking off. Jung would see these not as random misfortunes, but as shadow interventions. Parts of you that feel threatened by success are working to undermine it. Then there's the compensatory behavior pattern. This is when the successful person develops a secret life that directly contradicts their public image. Think of the disciplined fitness influencer who binges on junk food when alone, the financial advisor with gambling debts, the productivity guru with a video game addiction. These aren't just hypocrisies, they're psychological compensation mechanisms. The more extremely you identify with one pole of human experience, the more the opposite pole demands expression through the shadow. A third pattern is projection, perceiving in others what you deny in yourself. This often manifests as hypervigilance against specific traits or behaviors. The business leader obsessed with rooting out laziness in employees while ignoring their own burnout. The parent fixated on their child's aggression while repressing their own anger. The political crusader who sees corruption everywhere except in their own ideological camp. Jung noted that our emotional reactions reveal our projections. Whatever triggers disproportionate rage, disgust, or contempt in you is likely showing you your own disowned shadow material. Perhaps most destructive is the inflation pattern, when success leads to an inflated ego that believes itself exempt from normal human limitations and moral constraints. This is the executive who believes the rules don't apply to them, the spiritual teacher who exploits students' trust, the artist who treats collaborators as disposable. Jung called this state possession by the shadow, where the ego identifies with archetypal energies and loses all sense of proportion and limitation. The person genuinely believes they're special, chosen, or beyond conventional morality, setting the stage for catastrophic falls. Finally, there's the emptiness pattern. This is success's hollow core, achieving everything you thought you wanted only to feel a profound inner emptiness. The shadow here manifests not as destructive action, but as existential depression. The meaning crisis that often follows major achievements stems from having oriented your life around external metrics while neglecting the soul's deeper needs. All these patterns share a common thread. The greater the success, the more energy becomes available to the shadow, and the more dramatic its eventual expression. Before we move deeper into understanding how to work with these shadow forces, I want to take a moment to connect with you. If you're finding value in these insights, consider subscribing to the channel. We explore these profound psychological and philosophical truths that most content creators won't touch. Hit subscribe to join us on this journey of deeper understanding. Now, let's continue our exploration of Jung's warning about success. Part 4. The collective shadow in success cultures. Jung's insights extend beyond individual psychology to collective phenomena. Just as individuals have shadows, so do groups, organizations, and entire cultures. And nowhere is the collective shadow more evident than in cultures built around success. Silicon Valley provides a perfect case study. Its public persona celebrates innovation, meritocracy, and making the world better through technology. Yet its shadow repeatedly erupts. Data exploitation scandals, toxic workplace cultures, founder meltdowns, and products that undermine the very social goods they claim to support. This isn't just corporate hypocrisy. It's a collective shadow manifestation, the unconscious counterbalance to the industry's conscious idealism. The financial sector shows similar patterns. Its persona emphasizes prudent stewardship and rational market efficiency. Its shadow periodically erupts in speculation frenzies, fraud scandals, and systemic crashes. The greater the industry's success and self-assurance, the more destructive its shadow eruptions. We see this in celebrity culture too. The entertainment industry's shadow side, exploitation, abuse, addiction, isn't separate from its success. It's intertwined with it. The very mechanisms that create stellar success often contain the seeds of spectacular downfall. Jung would view these collective patterns through the lens of what he called participation mystique, the unconscious identification with group psychology. When you enter a success-focused environment, you don't just adopt its conscious values. You also participate in its collective shadow. The organization's unacknowledged darker impulses seek expression through its members. This explains why ethical people often participate in unethical systems. The collective shadow overrides individual consciousness, especially when reinforced by shared success narratives. The investment banker who would never personally steal may participate in a system that effectively does so, blinded by the collective persona of creating market efficiency. The tech worker who values privacy may help build surveillance products, caught in the collective shadow behind the persona of connecting people. Success cultures are particularly dangerous because they offer powerful incentives to conform while punishing shadow awareness. Questioning the hidden costs of success gets you labeled as negative, not a team player, or lacking ambition. The group demands participation in its communal self-deception. Jung observed that people who are blind to their personal shadows are especially susceptible to possession by collective shadows. The more successful you become within a system, the more likely you are to embody both its idealized persona and its disowned shadow. This creates a troubling paradox. The most successful people in any field are often simultaneously its greatest standard-bearers and its most profound embodiments of its shadow. The celebrated CEO represents both the best and worst of capitalist values. The revered religious leader channels both the highest spiritual ideals and the most problematic aspects of dogmatic authority. Understanding this collective dimension is crucial because it means that working with your shadow isn't just a personal growth project. It's also a form of resistance against collective delusion. By becoming conscious of how success cultures weaponize both idealization and shadow projection, you gain some immunity to their more destructive aspects. Part 5. The shadow work of successful people. If success amplifies the shadow, is the answer to avoid achievement? Jung would emphatically say no. His goal wasn't to eliminate the shadow, an impossible task, but to integrate it consciously. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The path isn't rejection of success, but achievement paired with relentless self-awareness. So what does shadow work look like for successful people? It starts with the fundamental Jungian practice of shadow recognition, acknowledging that the disowned parts of yourself exist and influence your behavior. For the successful, this means radical honesty about the gap between your public image and your full humanity. It means admitting that alongside your visible achievements exist invisible struggles, primitive impulses, and disowned desires. The next step is shadow dialogue, developing a relationship with these disowned aspects rather than trying to eliminate them. Jung pioneered active imagination techniques, where you literally converse with shadow elements as if they were distinct personalities. This might seem strange, but it acknowledges a psychological reality. Repressed material does develop a kind of autonomy. For the successful person, this dialogue often reveals surprising truths. The shadow rarely wants to destroy your success entirely. It usually wants acknowledgement, expression, and integration. Your repressed creativity doesn't want to end your successful but creatively stifling corporate career. It wants channels for expression alongside it. Your disowned vulnerability doesn't want to shatter your leadership image. It wants authentic connections, where you can occasionally set down the burden of constant strength. Another crucial practice is shadow projection retrieval, recognizing when you're seeing your own disowned material in others. Jung noted that the shadow is most visible in your judgments. When you react with disproportionate emotion to someone else's behavior, you're likely encountering your own shadow. For successful people, this often means examining your harshest judgments of others in your field. The traits that most disgust you in competitors or colleagues are often disowned aspects of yourself. The executive who despises political colleagues is usually denying their own political maneuvering. The artist who can't stand attention-seeking peers is typically repressing their own need for recognition. Perhaps most challenging is shadow expression, finding healthy channels for disowned energies. This means creating contained spaces where shadow aspects can be acknowledged without destructive acting out. For successful people, this might mean physical practices that honor primitive energies, intense exercise, martial arts, dance, creative outlets that allow expression of darker themes or taboo thoughts, relationships with trusted equals who see your full humanity, not just your success. Ritual spaces, therapy, meditation, journaling, where the mask can safely come off. Controlled exposure to failure, limitation, and ordinariness. The most profound shadow work involves archetype integration, recognizing that both your success and your shadow connect to universal patterns larger than your individual psychology. Jung identified numerous archetypes: the hero, the ruler, the sage, the trickster, the destroyer, that play roles in the psyche. Success often involves identifying with light archetypes while projecting dark ones onto others. Integration means recognizing that all these forces operate within you. The successful CEO must acknowledge both their inner ruler, the source of their authority, and their inner destroyer, the capacity for creative disruption that can become destructive when denied. The celebrated artist must recognize both their inner creator and their inner charlatan, the fear of being revealed as a fraud. By consciously holding these archetypal tensions, you prevent unconscious possession by any single pattern. You can access the power of success archetypes without becoming inflated by them. If you're finding these insights valuable, please consider subscribing to our channel. We regularly explore these deeper psychological and philosophical dimensions that most content creators avoid. Now, let's continue with our final thoughts on navigating success with shadow awareness. Part 6. Integration: Success with Shadow Awareness. What does success look like when informed by shadow integration? It transforms in several profound ways. First, it becomes cyclical rather than linear. Shadow-aware individuals don't pursue endless upward trajectories. They recognize the psychological necessity of alternating expansion with contraction, achievement with reflection, publicity with privacy. They build fallow periods into their success journeys, time for psychological composting where shadow material can be processed. This rhythm prevents the pressure buildup that leads to catastrophic shadow eruptions. Instead of spectacular rises and falls, their careers show sustainable waves of achievement and integration. Second, success becomes relational rather than positional. Those with shadow awareness define achievement not just by standing above others, but by creating value with and for others. They're less trapped in comparison and competition because they've integrated the shadow aspects of their ambition. This shift from positional to relational success reduces the existential fragility that makes successful people so vulnerable to shadow possession. When your identity isn't solely built on being at the top, you can survive the inevitable fluctuations of fortune without psychological disintegration. Third, success becomes multidimensional rather than monomaniacal. Shadow integration requires acknowledging the full spectrum of human needs, not just achievement and recognition, but also rest, play, connection, and meaning. This prevents the dangerous narrowing of identity that fuels shadow development. The integrated, successful person maintains multiple sources of self-worth. Their professional achievements matter, but don't exclusively define them. They nurture other dimensions of life not as distractions from success, but as essential counterbalances to it. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, success becomes conscious of its dark side without being paralyzed by it. The shadow-aware successful person doesn't pretend to have transcended ego, ambition, or darker motivations. Instead, they maintain an ongoing conversation with these forces. This consciousness creates a crucial gap between impulse and action. When shadow material arises, as it inevitably will, they can recognize it without automatically acting it out. The executive feels the impulse to exploit a power differential, but chooses not to, because they've already acknowledged this capacity within themselves. The celebrated figure feels the pull of grandiosity, but maintains perspective through shadow dialogue. Jung wrote, "To confront a person with their shadow is to show them their own light." This paradoxical insight reveals the ultimate transformation of success through shadow work. By acknowledging your capacity for destruction, you gain greater access to genuine creation. By accepting your limitations, you expand your true capabilities. By embracing your darker aspects, you become more genuinely light-filled. This integration doesn't make success easier. In many ways, it's more demanding than the conventional path. It requires constant vigilance, regular introspection, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. But it makes success more sustainable, more meaningful, and far less likely to end in spectacular implosion. The shadow-integrated successful person still achieves, still creates impact, still receives recognition. But they do so with a psychological wholeness that conventional success lacks. They experience what Jung called individuation, becoming the full, unique individual they're meant to be, rather than a persona-driven success machine destined for collapse. In a culture obsessed with spectacular achievement and equally spectacular downfalls, this integrated path rarely makes headlines. It doesn't produce the dramatic arcs our success narratives celebrate, but it does produce something far more valuable: sustainable impact and genuine well-being. Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." The path of success with shadow awareness isn't comfortable. It requires facing what most people spend their lives avoiding. But consider the alternative: the pain of unconscious shadow eruptions that destroy what you've worked so hard to build. The choice isn't whether to experience the shadow, it's whether you'll meet it consciously or be ambushed by it repeatedly. Success doesn't exempt you from this human work, it makes it more urgent. As your external achievements grow, your internal work must deepen proportionally. This isn't just psychological theory. It's practical wisdom confirmed by countless shattered lives at the heights of success. The shadow doesn't demand abandonment of your ambitions. It asks only for acknowledgement, for relationship, for integration into your full humanity. Give it this conscious attention, and it transforms from saboteur to ally, not in achieving conventional success, but in something far more valuable: becoming wholly, authentically yourself.